Anglers all over the world have heard tales of the legendary fly fishing in New Zealand. Huge wild trout and some of the most pristine rivers you've ever seen in your life. But accompanying those tales are warnings of all the challenges you may face. Fish numbers are pretty low, and the ones that are there are spooky, picky, and just tricky to fool. Can someone who's never fished in this unique environment find any amount of success down here? And how in the world are you supposed to choose from the endless, excellent rivers on these islands? If you only have a short time, you probably ought to hire a guide. But what if you didn't have a short time? What if you had a whole southern summer? Then could you crack the code? There'll be challenges. Nothing worth doing ever comes easy.
Struggling. Big time. It's impossible, man.
But this isn't some impossible dream or an unsolvable puzzle. Once you put the pieces together, you'll reveal some of the best fly fishing in the entire world.
Yes! Look at this thing! I mean, come on! This is the fish of a lifetime. I'm so excited. I could leave now and be happy. Whew.
This is my summer in the Southern Hemisphere, searching for the best fly fishing New Zealand has to offer. My name is Sam, and this is a Fly All Season story. Thanks for watching. Part 1. Get Your Feet Wet. The North Island and Nelson. Fly fishing in New Zealand had been on my bucket list for a long time, but I can't say that this would be my first visit. Back in the pre-COVID days of 2020, I undertook the task of hiking from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island. I walked 3,000 kilometers over 4 months on Te Awaroa. Needless to say, this was one of the hardest, most intense, and beautiful things I've ever done in my life. It was life-changing in many ways, and I fell in love with the country of New Zealand, seeing all these places that most tourists would never venture. The North Island was a really varied experience. Starting with tropical beaches and rainforests on the north half, I walked through mud, farms, climbed mountains, and canoed for a week. The weather was a little rough, and at times it was miserable, but I really loved the North Island. That said, the South is where things really picked up. Easily one of the most beautiful places I've been in my entire life. The weather was still a little shaky at times, and I learned the true meaning of wind down here. But the places I saw and the things I experienced will stick with me for the rest of my life. Things were going great, I had some awesome trail companions, and I was really close to finishing until COVID hit. I had to unceremoniously cut my trip short just a few days from the finish line. I fled back to the United States, and just like that, my time in New Zealand was over. It was a bummer not being able to finish the trail, but I'd seen so much and done most of the cool parts anyway. I wanted to come back, don't get me wrong, but not to finish the trail. What did stick with me though, as a big regret, I didn't bring my fly rod. Especially on the South Island, I was constantly walking along and crossing these beautiful rivers and always looking for fish. I didn't really have the time or the desire to carry the extra weight while I was hiking, but every time I caught a glimpse of one of the legendary trout, I'd curse myself a little bit. At the time, I didn't know how or when, but I was determined to come back, this time rod in hand. Fast forward a couple years, and that time had come. Without diving too deep into my personal life, it felt like a whole lifetime had passed since I'd been to New Zealand. My outlook on things had certainly changed considerably. There's a poem by Mary Oliver called The Summer Day that summarizes this pretty well. You can go read the whole thing on your time, but I'll just leave you with the last 2 lines. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I found myself with a free winter, some extra saved up cash, and an overwhelming feeling that if I didn't take this opportunity, I might not get another. You just never know. So I took it. December through March, 4 months to wander the best fly fishing country in the world, no obligations, only rough plans, solo. No guides and no lodges. I was attempting a once-in-a-lifetime DIY New Zealand fly fishing road trip. Just getting to New Zealand from the Northeast United States is no easy task, but after almost 24 hours of flights, I arrived in Auckland. An old trail friend was gracious enough to let me borrow her car for a few weeks while she was out of the country. So I had some time to wander the countryside of the North Island and see what I could get myself into. My plan was to spend most of my time on the South Island, but that's not to say I didn't want to fish the North Island a little bit too. But before I started fishing, I wanted to unwind from the grueling travel and spend some time enjoying the North Island's amazing beaches before I got too far south. I was fortunate enough to have the savings to go on a trip like this, but I was not on a big budget. So to save money, weather permitting, I was camping pretty much every night. The New Zealand Department of Conservation, or DOC, operates campgrounds all over the country. And as the months wore on, I'd become a familiar sight at a lot of them, although not many can beat the views that this one had. And then one slightly less relaxing side trip. I decided I'd spend a night up on the slopes of a pretty famous volcano, Mount Taranaki. This was a bit of a bucket list item and a bit of PT for the grueling months I had ahead of me. If you ever get the opportunity to climb this mountain and spend a night at this hut, you just have to do it. I've never experienced anything quite like this. After a night spent in maybe the coolest place I've ever slept, it was time to get down. Easier said than done. I was ready to test my fly fishing skills on a few North Island rivers and see what New Zealand fishing was all about. First up was a small river not all that far from Taranaki. Meandering through an active farm, there were sheep and cows all over the place, but there were access easements and a hiking track that could take you to the headwaters. The river looked a tad high and cloudy from the previous day's rain, but nothing I couldn't handle. I started fishing cautiously. I'm a fine fly fisherman. I can certainly catch fish anyway, but New Zealand has a reputation. Extremely large, wary, and most of all, spooky trout. I have to admit, before this trip started, I was questioning how much success I would find down here. Did I need to hire a guide? Did I need to go to a lodge? I really had no idea. It's one thing to read about a place or watch a YouTube video. It's another thing to experience it firsthand. These first few holes, I was not sight fishing, I was just blind casting, so I'd have to get pretty lucky to find a fish, in hindsight.
This is easily the biggest trout I've ever caught. Look at this thing. Holy crap.
You can see my hands shaking. I'd never held a fish like this before. The North Island is more known for rainbows and the South browns. So to catch a big brown like this as my first New Zealand fish, really can't beat that. Day one was already a huge success. I'd push on upriver, of course, but what more can you ask for? I wasn't having much luck spotting any fish, and blind casting was proving pretty fruitless, other than that first fish. But what a beautiful river. These sights and sounds were pretty foreign to me, and I was just enjoying the day. Eventually, though, a fish did make itself pretty obvious to me. Since he didn't want anything to do with my dry dropper here, I figured a weightless pheasant tail might do the trick. Thrilled with those two fish, it was time to call it a day, head back to my car, and find a place to camp for the night. I was on a strict budget, after all. Stop number 2 is another smaller river, a tributary of a much larger one near Hawke's Bay. Snowfall and the recent rains had made the bigger river much too high for my liking. This smaller tributary looked great. I decided to work on my fish spotting, be more selective, and cover a lot of water today, less blind casting. I didn't really have to go all that far before I spotted my first fish of the day in this back eddy.
I'm amazed I landed this fish. I thought he was gonna get stuck somewhere in that mess. Not a bad first fish of the day.
The wind was becoming a problem, but these fish were big enough that they stuck out even in less than ideal spotting conditions.
Huge fish over there. Hard to tell. This water's deep and fast, so. See ya. Another beautiful buck, male rainbow. Stoked. What a beautiful day. Amazing river.
I was still reflexively doing some blind fishing. But on sighted fish, I was 2 for 2 for the day, and the third opportunity made itself very obvious. In hindsight, I hadn't really learned how to fight these fish just yet, and they kept taking me downriver. Didn't matter in this case, though. I was successfully able to land my third fish of the day.
Another great rainbow on the nymph. Once again, took me way downstream. No complaints. No complaints. Whew. Owl hooked it, snatched the nymph off. It's okay. It happens.
3 for 4 ain't half bad, in my opinion, and I wasn't too upset about that one. But that would end up being my last action of the day. It seemed like the further upriver I got, the less fish I was spotting.
I haven't seen a fish in 45 minutes of walking. I'm pretty far away from my car now. I think it's time to turn around.
These long walks back after a successful day of fishing were some of my favorite times in New Zealand. For whatever reason, they stick with me much more than their equivalents back home. Especially ones like this, with easy wading and a wide, flat river corridor to walk. Successful day 2 of fishing in New Zealand, I'd say. But I had bigger plans for my last trip on the North Island. I was going to backpack into an ancient rainforest that had a river that caught my attention. Back in my campground, I enjoyed my post-fishing meal and rested up. This New Zealand style of fishing required me to cover a lot of water, and my legs were definitely feeling it. The next day was a rainy travel day. I spent much of it hugging the coastline before heading inland to the dense forests. Even though I was mainly here to fish, it was comforting having the ocean nearby. I just love watching big waves crashing on a stormy day. The rivers I passed on the way appeared pretty swollen from the recent rains. I was a little bit concerned for my upcoming trip, but I'd never know unless I tried. I made camp near the trailhead, and this ended up being one of my favorites of the entire trip. A little bit loud, though. Maybe I should have camped further from the waterfall. As I enjoyed evening in this peaceful spot, I packed my bag and prepared for the days ahead. The morning was calm and damp, but the skies were clearing, so I decided I'd go for it. I hadn't planned to go too far in. There was a basic shelter about 10 kilometers up the trail where I'd pitch my tent. I'd spend the night there and use that as a base camp for some fishing excursions up and down the river. I immediately found myself in a special and unique place. An ancient temperate rainforest made up of trees several hundred feet tall and up to 10 feet in diameter. Many of the trees here are over 400 years old, and this is perhaps the best example of this ecosystem remaining. Known as a podocarp forest, over 95% of this habitat type is gone from New Zealand, logged long ago. In addition to the fishing, I was also hoping to catch a glimpse of some of the endangered birds that call this forest home. It turns out that within this ancient forest, I'd found myself on some stunning water. Although the fishing wasn't lights out to start.
Bad start.
I wasn't spotting any fish right off the bat, so I did a little blind casting. In hindsight, maybe not the best use of my time. You'll definitely get into some fish this way, but down here, fish spotting is the name of the game. That acrobatic fish shook the hook. I wasn't in a very good position, and I couldn't really fight him properly. Oh well, still a great sign that there were fish this far up in the system. I made a few more casts and then headed back up the trail. I wanted to be a little bit more picky with my spot selection the rest of the way. I wanted to do more sight fishing, and only the very best water was worth a stop. I could tell the river was definitely a little high. Manageable, sure, but fish spotting was proving difficult, and I was having a hard time wading as well. This meant that even when I saw really nice looking water, I couldn't necessarily access it. Finally, I caught sight of a fish sitting in shallow water right next to the bank.
Yes.
Man, I barely hooked this guy, but it stuck, and I had my first rainforest rainbow. Time to head back up onto the trail and make my way to my home for the night. I didn't waste much time setting up my tent and quickly made my way back to the river. Even with these long southern summer days, the remaining daylight was precious. More exciting to me than any fish on this trip, I caught my first sight of the Theo. Also known as the blue duck, this is a special animal. They're endangered, one of the rarest birds in the world, and only found here in New Zealand. Theo are a key indicator species for the health of river systems, requiring clean, fast-flowing water surrounded by intact native forest. Simply put, the more blue ducks a river system has, the healthier it is. In some ways, they're a lot like native trout, but the trout are not native here, and these birds have evolved in these forests for millennia. Unfortunately, the census taken in 2021 showed just 863 breeding pairs total, both islands combined. Their habitat has been degraded over the years. Water quality deterioration is a big cause. Logging, loss of riparian vegetation, and water diversions for agriculture have all taken their toll. But introduced predators are also a huge issue. Historically, New Zealand had no native mammals. So invasive species such as cats, dogs, rats, possums, ferrets, and stoats all eat blue duck eggs and even attack the adults. Since these are all relatively recent introductions, the birds have no evolutionary defense. FEO face a real extinction threat. And us fishermen should care about these issues too. Clean water, intact river systems, and healthy forests all lead to more trout. Alright, now that the amateur birder in me was satisfied, it was time to satiate the borderline obsessed fly fisherman too. I spotted this really nice looking fish in the middle of the current, and I crossed to the other side to get a better casting angle.
How it goes.
Close. That was a good one.
Yeah. Oh well.
Good luck.
Thank you.
It figures I lose the biggest fish of the day just as another hiker walks by to give me an audience. I was losing daylight, but I had time for a couple more pools. I spotted this nice rainbow on what would end up being my last attempt of the day. One delayed, hook set later, and that was it for the day. 1 for 4 on hookups, definitely not my best, but I wasn't in a mood to complain.
This place is crazy. It's so cool. I've never fished in a rainforest before. Fishing's really hard, but I had 2 really good ones on. Just, didn't work out. Had a lot of swearing. And I saw a few others. There's fish in there, it's just really hard to access the river. But I saw a lot of the endangered ducks, the blue ducks. So that was the highlight of the day, really. Great tramping. Quiet, nobody else here.
All I had left to do before bed was eat dinner and take in the exotic sights and sounds of this amazing place.
Good morning, day 2. I already accessed most of the easy to get to pools, so today will probably just be redoing some of that. I'm gonna go upstream, downstream a little bit, come back and pack up.
First stop of day 2 was the last stop of day 1. I knew there was a nice fish in this pool, and I knew I could fool him, just needed a better hook set this time.
Alright, there's a fish right there in this gorgeous pool. I got him to take the nymph yesterday and I messed it up, so maybe he'll go again. He looks like he's feeding, so we'll see.
With water levels this high and no way to move along the bank because of the dense vegetation, I couldn't really chase downstream. I had to keep these fish close, which is easier said than done.
All worth it. What a beauty. Wow.
That one felt great, and another highlight of the day would only be a bit upstream from here. As cool as it was to see these ducks so close, that would have to be the last distraction of the day. I was planning to hike out and really wanted to catch at least one more fish before I left this forest. It was time to head back to camp and pack up. I had a few spots I'd made note of on the way in that I wanted to try. On the way out, I was lucky enough to catch a brief glimpse of the kaka, an endangered parrot. Although this bird was not as generous with its time as the blue ducks were. Back on the water, continuing the trend of seeing things for the first time, here's the New Zealand eel. This is a sight that would become pretty familiar to me over the coming months. These things are everywhere. Just downriver, I sighted what would be my last fish of the trip. The approach was tricky and casting was difficult at best. I had to be careful at this one. And excuse the camera angle, this was the best I could do.
Okay, here we go. There's a really nice fish in here. Hopefully I can catch it. Can't really film it. I need to be very stealthy in here.
I couldn't go either upriver or downriver. I struggled to keep this lively fish close.
Now this is the fish of the trip, a true dinosaur. It was really tricky to get down to this spot. A lot of bushwhacking. Couldn't really film it very well. All worth it. Gorgeous.
I really couldn't have asked for much more from this river. Sure, I lost some fish and the conditions weren't perfect, but those were some awesome rainbows and an even more amazing location. I could easily have stayed longer, but it was about time to leave. If you think about this 4-month trip as a 5-course meal, the North Island was just the appetizer. Up here, I wanted to get my feet wet and get a sense of the style of New Zealand fishing. But the main attraction is and always was the South Island. Its sweeping landscapes, massive mountain ranges, wild rivers, and of course, huge brown trout. I took a day to rest and recuperate, overeat a little bit, and hang out with these very friendly cats. But I couldn't hang around. I had a lot to do. I drove back up to Auckland, returned my friend's car, and got on a plane. Finally, South Island, here we come. The views from the short flight to Nelson got me even more excited. I had 3 months to explore this fly fisherman's paradise. I didn't hesitate picking up my rental car / home for the coming months, and I made my way to an area it had circled for a long time. I'd made a pretty detailed 3-month plan, and I was hoping to stick to it. First up was a few days in Nelson, notorious for its extremely large and extremely tricky brown trout. You could spend years fishing the South Island and not hit every river, so I did have to leave a lot of things off. But if you do your research well, I think it's pretty tough to go wrong.
First night on the South Island in a pretty crowded, loud campground, but there's some beautiful rivers nearby. I'm gonna check them out in the next few days. It took a month to get here, so I'm really excited.
Finally, after months of planning, first day fishing on the South Island. Looking back, I did choose a pretty ambitious first river. This whole region is known for big and spooky brown trout, but this river even more so. Hopes were high and I was confident, but was I a little too confident maybe?
Alright, so my second fish of the day, spooked the first one. This one is rising in this slack water on the edge of the pool. He's cruising around. I had to get down so he didn't see me. This is crazy fishing. It's so stealthy. Oh, there he is. Well, that spooked him. This is hard, man. This is hard.
I was spotting fish, although up to this point, also spooking all of them. I hadn't gotten a serious look at my fly yet. I was learning very quickly that the South Island had this reputation for a reason. These fish were not easy to fool.
I saw at least 5 fish. I got really solid looks at 2 of them, but something was off with the drift. You gotta be so perfect on this river, and it's just, I'm not used to that. I moved upstream, stopped for some quick lunch. I've heard the fish here are even pickier. But the river looks beautiful. At the very least, it'll be a nice afternoon walking around, and then I'll find somewhere to camp. But
Before I could get back to the river, another iconic New Zealand bird came by for a visit, the weka. These guys are very friendly, definitely looking to mooch some food, and I'd be seeing quite a few of them down here. But back to business, this section looked amazing, and I spotted a huge fish immediately. I gotta admit though, I wasn't feeling confident at this point, but sometimes that's when things work out for you. I'd never fought a fish this big before, but I'd learned up north to keep him upstream and take my time. My heart was pounding. This was the fish I'd come all this way for. Just when I thought I had him, he made one last dash downriver, but just off camera, I netted the biggest trout I'd ever seen.
Look at this thing! Holy crap!
Even compared to all the North Island fish, this one was a monster. I'm not usually one to measure lengths or weigh fish, but with a trout like that, does any of it even matter? This was a beast.
I am so stoked right now. I mean, this is the fish. I mean, come on! Come on! Oh my God, he took the dry. Biggest fish of my life. If I wasn't leaving in 3 months, I'd say this would be the fish of my lifetime, but who knows what's in store. For now, this is the fish of a lifetime. I'm so excited. Oh. Its outpost is like that big. Holy shit. All right, time to get you back, my friend. I could leave now and be happy. Whew.
Super simple fly selection. All it takes is a good approach and, most importantly, a good cast. For my first fish on the South Island, that huge brown might have set an impossibly high standard. But now that I knew that this was possible, I was so excited to see what lay ahead.
There's another nice brown rising on the far bank. See if I can sneak up to him. Might have spooked him. That's all it takes is just one slightly off cast. What you gonna do? Well, as you can kind of see, it's windy and the sun is gone. Not ideal fish spotting conditions, but I will press on for a little while. I've seen 5 or 6 already in this section, so I'm doing better than down there. Maybe there's just more fish, or maybe the water's a little different. I don't know, but I like it better up here. There's a really beautiful fish feeding on the other side, but I have no way of crossing, and this current is a mess, so I'm just gonna try. I have to try, but it's a tough one. I've been watching him for a while. I'm gonna wait till he gets back into his feeding pattern that I've been paying attention to. He's kind of doing laps of that eddy over there, so if I can somehow get it to drift in front of him, maybe he'll take it, and then I'll have to sprint down the pool. Yeah, I think he's spooked. I'm gonna give him a minute to see if he starts eating again, but I think he's... All right, he started eating again, albeit a little more cautiously. I put on bigger fly. Maybe I just splash it in front of his face and he'll eat it. He was like slowly sipping in a line. 1, 2, 3, and then he got to my fly, and he took it. I don't think I had very good line control. He got off right away. But what a fish. Dang.
You can't win them all, and I still clearly had a lot to learn. If I'd learned anything on this first day on the South Island, my casting needed to be a lot better. I spent a little while longer looking for fish, and I saw a couple, but no luck. 2 takes all day out of maybe 10 fish spotted. The South Island was proving tricky. But when the one fish landed is like that, you only need the one. What an awesome day and a really special river. I planned to revisit the Nelson region at the end of my time on the South Island, but there was one more river I wanted to hit before I moved on. I found a nice camp, enjoyed my victory fish and chips, and settled in for the night. Pretty rainy night, dreary morning. See if I can get onto some fish, but I'm not sure how the river's gonna be. This one's apparently pretty reactive in the rain. I drove a few hours last night, got here right around dark. Didn't really think it was gonna rain this much, but here we are. When you're on a 3-month road trip, this is part of it. Just gonna deal with it. Gonna go to the store, get some breakfast, and check out the river, see what's going on. Food was consumed off camera. Maybe isobutane and Mother Energy drink aren't breakfast, but they are essential items. Despite a wet night and a pretty dreary morning, it actually ended up being a beautiful day. The clouds cleared up on my drive, and by the time I got to the river, things were looking up.
There's so many rivers in this area. I'm on a small tributary of the Buller. I'm hoping that it's, beautiful weather. See if the fish cooperate. This is another tricky river supposedly, but I've extended my leader. You can see it's almost 18 feet now. Yeah, give it a shot. Jeez, I saw my first fish of the day, and he'd vanished. I don't really have an explanation. I didn't even really make a cast. Maybe I stepped on the wrong rock. Struggling, big time.
Whatever confidence I'd gained the day before was quickly evaporating. This river was, to put it lightly, getting the better of me.
It's impossible, man.
I was seeing plenty of fish, but my casting just wasn't good enough. I was frustrated, but I certainly wasn't ready to give up. I saw a nice fish feeding pretty aggressively, and I tried to make an extra careful approach.
Finally got one to take. And what a fish. I mean, I've walked so far today. Oh yeah, all worth it. Seems like pretty average for this creek, but I mean,
once again, if the only fish you catch on a day of fishing is like this one, you tend to forget about all the missed opportunities. I went a little further upriver, but I had a long walk back. Another awesome day, and this river taught me a lot. I had a lot of work to do if I was going to be successful on the South Island, and luckily I had a lot of rivers ahead of me to hone my skills. I returned to camp to one of the most stunning sunsets thus far, and while there was more I wanted to do in Nelson, it was time to move on. Up next, the wild west coast of the South Island, and rumors of some of the best wilderness brown trout fishing in the world.
this is a strong, thick, healthy fish. That's why I hiked all the way in here. That's a beautiful fish. Look at those colors. That's just an awesome fish. I'll remember this one for a long time. That's the fish of the day, for sure.